Hi guys, Train King James here, and if you guys remember, a little over a month ago, I did a video where I broke down the Railway Series book, Thomas and His Friends, and I talked about how I would fix it. Well, you guys really liked that video, so I've decided to do a different version here, and I'm going to talk about the HiT era, which is one of the more controversial eras of Thomas. The HiT era is seasons 8 through 12, a period of time where the episode length was around 7 minutes, and the show was noticeably more aimed at younger children, and this is where a lot of people in the fandom have said they stopped watching because they didn't like the episodes. And yeah, there were some really bad episodes. The problems of the HiT era really come down to two things: the writing of the stories and character usage. Whether characters were overused, underused, or improperly used, the HiT era just wasn't really everyone's cup of tea. Now, there were some gems in that era. Respect for Gordon and James the Second Best especially stick out to me. For that same reason, this gives me hope that we can change the HiT era in some ways and improve upon some of its worst episodes. So that's what we're going to do here today. I'm going to take 4 episodes that you all voted on for me to try to fix. You just didn't know it. I asked you guys what is your least favorite episode, and I got various responses. And I decided to pick 4 that stood out to me, and I'll reveal those 4 in a minute. But before we do that, I gotta talk about the rules. I have 3 main rules that I have to follow here. Number 1, the main characters have to stay the same. I'm not allowed to change a character no matter how improperly fit they are for the story they're in. Number 2, adding characters is fine, removing characters is not. And this sounds like an extension of the first rule, but I'm allowed to add characters to stories or add characters to scenes that they weren't in before, but I can't take a character out of the story that's a main role. If somebody randomly cameos or has a one-liner, that's not a huge deal. But I can't really take anybody out of a story just because they may be a problem with the plot. And the writing must be semi-realistic to the HiT era. That doesn't mean it's going to be simple and babyified. These stories that I have planned to fix will be able to compete with that of the other episodes of this era that I consider gems. So without further ado, let's get into it. Episode 1, Saved You. This was a Season 12 episode that many people didn't like because Thomas is an idiot. So how do we not make Thomas an idiot this episode? Well, we'll start off the story the same way. Here, Thomas wants to be a hero. But instead of Thomas just wanting to be a hero and dashing around the island doing dumb things to try to prove it, he's talked down to by Gordon, who vehemently believes that Thomas is too small to be a hero. Thomas is told he has to pick up a firefighter for an important ceremony, and Thomas decides to do that job. On the way, he sees a water tower that's slowly falling and collapsing onto Duck, and he wishes to help him, but before Thomas can act on it, Rocky and Percy come in, inspired by that Playrail pack, and manage to save Duck, making Thomas not able to be a hero in this scene. Later on, he comes across a tree that blocks the line for Donald and Douglas. Thomas wishes to push the tree out of the way, but instead Harvey arrives to save them. And each time this happens, Thomas accepts the fact that he's just not the right engine for the situation, and other engines came along at the right time. Later on, he sees that Toby's broken down, and Thomas offers to go get a mechanic. But Gordon gets there first, and boasts that Thomas isn't fast enough to do it, and frankly, he has no way of being a hero. Dejected, Thomas goes on about his business, heading to pick up the fireman. However, along the way, he realizes Bertie is broken down with the school children, and they need to get to school. Thomas decides then and there that it's more important to get them to school than get the firefighter to the ceremony. So he takes the children to school. He's late to pick up the firefighter, but before he's admonished, the firefighter acknowledges Thomas as a hero. And at the end of the day, that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and that all Thomas did was his job, as a tank engine on the island of Sodor. And the reason why this version of the story is a little bit better is it feels more in tune with Thomas's character. He's willing to help, but he's not doing dumb things to try to quote-unquote help. He understands his limits, but it also bothers him. Thomas is always been ambitious, and this shows his ambition here, but we also see his caring side, the side that is eager to show what kind of engine he can prove himself to be and how he can help out, and he does it in his own special way. Episode 2, Skarloey the Brave. I can see the eye rolls, but hear me out. I think you guys are going to like this one. So, starting off the same way the original episode did, Skarloey, Rheneas, and Duncan are working at the incline in winter collecting coal. The trucks break away and nearly hit Skarloey. He avoids an accident, and Duncan makes fun of Skarloey for running away rather than trying to handle the trucks himself, and thus calls Skarloey a not very brave engine. And Skarloey just scoffs at the comment, and he refers to a story where he was very brave. And this is where rule number 3 comes in. I said the writing has to be semi-realistic to the HiT era, so this is pushing that boundary a little bit. But one of the things I felt about all of the Skarloey and Rheneas episodes, they would be a lot better if they took place as flashback stories to when they were younger, because Skarloey and Rheneas frankly act very immature. Skarloey has been known to be an immature character. As we go back to the Railway series, yes, I'm aware what I'm doing. Skarloey was boastful, rude, and just really immature when he first came to the island. But here, we get a different view of Skarloey. We see a older Skarloey in the show. We never get to see young Skarloey, until now. Skarloey flashes back to a time he and Rheneas were working at the incline, and he decided to go up it, and of course, the same hijinks ensue. So here, the main crux of the story, the Skarloey the Brave portion that everyone hated because Skarloey would never do this, is just pushed back in time to when he was younger and less sensible, as Rheneas would say. So Skarloey uses the story to prove that proving that you're brave doesn't mean you go do foolish things. Proving that you're brave is knowing what to do in an emergency, just like how Frosty saved Skarloey. Duncan just kind of scoffs at this, and the next day there's another incident at the incline, and Duncan ends up getting caught up in an accident because he tries to be brave. And that's how the episode ends. So, it's pushing it a little bit here to make the story a flashback, but one of the ideas that I thought of is the narrow gauge railway during the HiT era gets a lot of lore attached to it. It's talked about having stories often about its history. And of course we see things like Proteus, we hear about the Man in the Hills, or even someone like Freddy who had been to the railway before and had history with Sir Handel. So it's not highly unlikely to believe that Skarloey and Rheneas could have a flashback story here and there a couple times this season when they flash back to their youth to teach the younger engines a lesson. And I think that would be a fun trope to play off of in the series. Number 3. Edward strikes out. Yeah, we're doing this one. Pretty much named one of the worst episodes of the show, Edward Strikes Out was an episode that even as a kid, I just knew was wrong. So how do we change Edward here as the protagonist? Not switching him out, but how do we let him be in character while also doing something that's very out of character for him? Well, it goes like this. We're going to focus on Edward as a passive character in this episode. Rather than being an aggressive bully, Edward's very passive to the bullying. The episode starts out the same way. Gordon makes fun of Rocky, maybe even James is at the docks, there too, and Edward kind of tells them to be quiet about it and to leave Rocky alone, but he doesn't really stand up for himself and Rocky enough, and that's kind of been a character trait for Edward. He doesn't really stand up for himself a lot. He lets himself get bullied because he feels like he can take it, and he's rather passive in these situations. So it's not highly unlikely that Edward may be passive to other situations. When Edward would leave the docks, he'd give a, "oh, they'll get tired of it soon" comment. Something that you've heard far too often from Edward. And it doesn't help Rocky, it just makes him feel worse. It doesn't make him feel like Edward's sticking up for him, but more that, oh, just ignore them and they'll stop. But they don't stop. The same events of the episode play out. Edward has his accident because he's too busy thinking about the bullying, and Harvey comes to help out, not because Edward demands he do it, but because he just happened to be the closest by. Gordon crashes, and at this point, Edward realizes this is the perfect opportunity for Rocky to show himself. So Edward brings Rocky to the site, Rocky rescues Gordon, and the episode plays out pretty much the same way, and Edward apologizes and stands up for Rocky, and letting everyone know just how useful he was in assisting the cleanup of the accident. Here we see a different side of Edward that isn't highlighted but has been shown a few times, is his passiveness, and the problematic side of being a passive character. And this is a really complicated lesson to teach kids, but a very important one, that being passive towards bullying is almost as bad as being a bully themselves. And both Gordon, James, other characters, and Edward all learn a very valuable lesson here. Episode 4, Thomas's Frosty Friend. This was probably the most requested episode by you guys, and frankly, I do not blame you. I think this episode is my least favorite of the HiT era, because it takes the problems that I had with Saved You and magnifies them 10 times. Thomas is ridiculously stupid in this episode. So how do we change it? Well, let's play with a little bit of Thomas's naivety and make it a little more comedic, which I think that's what the show was going for. So the episode starts off the same way. Thomas is by the field, notices the children playing with this snowman balloon, and Thomas knows it's a balloon. And the children are sad that they have to say goodbye to it and go off to school, and Thomas feels bad for the children. Later on, Thomas passes by the field on the way to do other jobs, and the snowman gets hoisted up and attaches to his buffers. Unrealistic? Sure. Possible? Technically. I'm willing to break the bounds of reality, because the show had done it several times at this point. Thomas realizes this, and at first wants to take the snowman back, but then has the idea of being able to take the snowman balloon to the children. He can't go right away, and offers to take the snowman with him on his jobs. His crew is reluctant to this, but Thomas does it anyway. And as Thomas travels around the island, he realizes the trouble of carrying this balloon. He can't use certain bridges, he can't use certain tunnels, and he can't really do his journeys the way he's supposed to. When reaching Brenham Docks, he can't pass under the warehouse. When he goes to McColl's farm, he almost hits a tree. When he passes through Maythwaite Station, he almost hits the station roof with the balloon. It's just too complicated, and it increasingly frustrates Thomas, to the point where Thomas realizes the best thing for the balloon is to take it back to its field. So he takes the snowman balloon back, and offers to pick up the children from school, bring them to the field, and let them enjoy the snowman once again. It's a sillier episode, but I think that the comedic sign and the ideas of having Thomas run into various obstacles with the balloon, thus frustrating him, makes for an entertaining episode, and I think it would be something that you can kind of laugh at a little bit. I think kids would find funny. This idea of this balloon personified irritating Thomas, that it keeps getting in the way and Thomas cannot get his work done. I took what I consider to be the worst of the HiT era and made 4 solid stories. These aren't going to make top 10 lists or anything, but I think these episodes would feel a lot better, and I think would help fans have stayed longer engaged in the show. But I'm not perfect. If you guys have ideas about how you'd fix these episodes, let me know. Anyways, this is Train King James, signing off.